Most manipulation doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like kindness. It sounds like concern. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're already playing a role in someone else's game. The unsettling part? If someone is quietly manipulating you, you probably won't notice it at first. Because the most effective manipulators don't force control. They guide you toward it, slowly, subtly, until your choices stop feeling like your own. And chances are you've already experienced it. Not from a stranger, but from someone close to you. Someone who seemed supportive. Someone who just wanted what's best for you. There are certain patterns manipulators rely on, quiet signals most people overlook. But once you see them, you can't unsee them. The first sign is something that feels strangely flattering. They study you. At first, it feels amazing. They seem to understand you instantly, your interests, your frustrations, your insecurities. They agree with you more than anyone else ever has. It feels like you finally met someone who gets you. But that's not connection, that's observation. Manipulators often mirror you in the beginning. They copy your opinions, your humor, even your values, not because they share them, but because it lowers your defenses. When someone feels familiar, you trust them faster. And once trust is established, influence becomes effortless. The second sign is harder to notice because it hides inside compliments. They make you feel special, but slightly dependent. They'll say things like, "You're one of the few people I can really talk to," or, "I don't trust anyone the way I trust you." It feels like intimacy, but there's a subtle weight attached to it. Now you feel responsible for their feelings, responsible for their trust, responsible for maintaining that emotional connection. And without realizing it, you begin adjusting your behavior to keep their approval. That's not affection, that's psychological leverage. The third sign shows up when something small happens, a disagreement, a misunderstanding, a simple boundary you try to set, and suddenly things become confusing. They don't argue directly. Instead, they shift reality. They'll say things like, "That's not what I meant. You're misunderstanding me. You're being too sensitive." At first, it feels like a normal conversation, but over time, a strange pattern appears. Your memory feels less reliable. Your reactions start to feel exaggerated. Your confidence in your own perception slowly weakens. This is one of the most subtle manipulation techniques in human psychology. Not controlling what you think, but controlling how much you trust your own thoughts. Once someone achieves that, they don't need to argue with you anymore, because you'll start arguing with yourself. But here's the part most people never see coming. Because the first three signs, they're only the setup. The real manipulation begins after you start doubting yourself, because that's when you become easier to guide. The fourth sign is something manipulators are surprisingly good at, creating quiet guilt. They rarely ask directly for what they want. Instead, they imply disappointment. Maybe they sigh when you say no. Maybe they mention how much they needed help after you already declined. Maybe they compare you to someone else who would have said yes. They never accuse you, but somehow you end up feeling like you failed them. And guilt is one of the most powerful behavioral triggers humans have. Because once you feel guilty, you start compensating. You give more time, more attention, more patience. And each time you do, the pattern becomes easier to repeat. Think about the last person who made you feel guilty for simply saying no. Someone you genuinely cared about. Someone whose disappointment felt unbearable. Now ask yourself honestly, was that your fault? Or was it by design? The next sign is one people almost never recognize while it's happening. It usually begins with vulnerability. They tell you about the ways they've been hurt, the people who betrayed them, the moments when they felt abandoned or misunderstood. It feels honest. It feels deeply human. And naturally, you soften. You become more patient with them, more understanding, more willing to overlook behavior that might normally raise a red flag. But something subtle begins to change, because the more you empathize with their pain, the more careful you become not to cause them any. And that's when your boundaries start quietly shifting. You respond faster than you want to. You avoid saying things that might upset them. You apologize even when you're not sure you did anything wrong, not because they demanded it, but because you don't want to hurt someone who has already been through so much. And that's the psychological trick. Selective vulnerability creates emotional gravity. It pulls your empathy toward them until protecting their feelings slowly becomes more important than protecting your own boundaries. One day you notice something strange. You're adjusting your behavior constantly, but they rarely adjust theirs, and that's the moment a difficult realization begins to form. What felt like emotional closeness may have quietly turned into emotional control. The final sign is the one people usually recognize too late. Your energy starts disappearing around them. Not in a loud, obvious way, just a quiet exhaustion. After conversations, you feel mentally drained. After spending time together, you feel strangely tense. You replay interactions in your head, wondering if you said the wrong thing, if you misunderstood something, if you should have responded differently. Healthy relationships don't make you feel like you're constantly being evaluated, but manipulation does. Because manipulation is rarely about power in the obvious sense. It's about psychological positioning. One person slowly becomes the emotional center of the dynamic, while the other becomes the one adjusting. And the most disturbing part? Many manipulators aren't even fully aware they're doing it. Some learned these behaviors early in life. Others discovered them accidentally and realized they worked. Which is why recognizing these patterns matters. Because manipulation doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like care. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it feels like closeness. But real connection doesn't make you question your own mind. It doesn't slowly shrink your boundaries. And it definitely doesn't leave you feeling like you're constantly trying to earn someone's approval. Once you start noticing these signs, something interesting happens. The patterns become obvious. The confusion disappears, and the game stops working. Because manipulation only thrives in the dark, and awareness is what finally turns the lights on.